Today we're going to be doing an ISO test on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. So what we're looking at here is I've created a split screen mode for you. I've recorded at 4 different ISO settings that the camera allows you to record at. The sensor cap is on, and I have cranked the midtones a little bit so you guys could see the amount of noise the camera is producing. As you can see on ISO 200, the noise is pretty minimal, which is expected. It's the lowest ISO setting you can do on this camera. And there's not a whole lot of difference between ISO 200 and ISO 400. They're both pretty minimal, and there's not a whole lot of difference there. Now, once we jump to ISO 800, Blackmagic has claimed that ISO 800 is the native ISO for this particular camera. This is supposed to be the sensor sweet spot where it's supposed to perform at its best. But I find the ISO 800 really quite noisy compared to most modern digital cameras. And from ISO 800 to 1600 is quite a large leap. 1600 just has so much noise that it's generating that it's really going to make your image muddy. You can see here with the split screen mode that all 4 ISO settings are producing a slightly different shift in blacks here, which is pretty common in most digital cameras. The higher you crank that ISO, the more color you're going to lose. The image is going to become a little bit more thinner, and you're just going to lose some of that detail. Now that we did the ISO test with the sensor cap on, I wanted to show you a video clip that I created that's a little bit more of a practical setting, something that we can compare our everyday footage to. I've got the ISO setting at 200, exposure at a 2.84 split. Now, this is a color graded image. This is not the either RAW or ProRes that comes straight out of the camera. And the reason why I color graded it was because I feel like by the time you push and pull the footage a little bit in post-production, you generate a little bit more noise typically. There's virtually really no noise happening at all. Maybe if you were in full screen mode, you might see a teeny bit of noise, the slightest amount. It's not going to be distracting. You're not going to have to use a noise reducer on this setting. You've got a pretty good looking image coming right out. At ISO 400, the exposure is set at a 4:5:6 split. Not a whole big difference between 200 and 400 ISO. Very controllable at this point. Not very noticeable. You're going to see slight movement in noise, but nothing major. At ISO 800, I've got the exposure set to 5.68 split. At 800 now, you're really starting to kind of notice the noise that's being created here. It's pretty distracting to me, to my eye. A little bit more noisier than I would expect the camera to perform at, especially at its native ISO. You can clean this up in post-production. I've got Red Giant's Denoiser 2, which does actually a really good job of denoising your footage. Some people use Neat Video, which does an excellent job of cleaning it up. DaVinci's got a noise reducer, so it's really not that big of a deal. At our last ISO setting at 1600, I've got the exposure set to f8:11 split. This is really where the noise is starting to become extremely noticeable. In a practical setting, the shadows and the highlights hide it really well. Really where you're noticing the noise here is in the midtones. There's a lot of movement going on in the that back wall there. I wouldn't recommend filming in this setting unless you absolutely have to. The noise levels just become a little bit too great here. And I feel like even with a noise reducer, you're not going to be able to clean it all up. Now that we're back to our split screen mode, this is kind of a recap at all 4 ISO settings and what they're doing for you. The biggest contrast is going to be between ISO 200 and 1600. We'll just kind of compare those two for now. If you look at the green stem in ISO 200 and compare that to the 1600, you're really losing saturation here. The kind of the yellow orange tint in the eagle's beak is becoming muted. The brownness in the feathers is muted. And that's because by cranking the ISO that high, you're really kind of running your image pretty thin. You're losing some of those subtle details and the nuances that you would normally get in filming at a lower ISO setting. If you look at ISO 800, that's not a huge difference at all from the 200 as far as losing your color. You'll notice with each ISO setting, our depth of field is becoming less shallow and less shallow, and that's because with each setting that I've cranked it up, I had to compensate that with the exposure. So don't be fooled by choosing ISO for your depth of field. I can make all these ISO settings look the exact same if I was to add an ND filter to the image. But I thought it was pretty interesting to compare all four photos. You are getting a different color cast really in all four. Now, one could argue if you were filming at the ISO 800 or 1600 that the colors are different, and yeah, you could color grade it more to make them look the same, but keep in mind the higher you push this ISO, the thinner your image is going to be, the more post-processing you're going to have to do, and that's just going to make your footage overall even more noisier or fall apart. Alright, I hope you guys liked the video. If you like what you saw, please like and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be uploading a lot more videos that do extensive tests on various cameras to see how far you can push the settings and know the boundaries of each camera. Alright, and thanks for watching.